Well, good morning and welcome to many of you to Washington, D.C. And to those of you here in Washington, D.C., welcome to the District of Columbia Court of Appeals Historic Courthouse and to the D.C. courts. I'm Anna Blackburn-Rigsby, and I am the Chief Judge of our D.C. Court of Appeals, and I chair our Joint Committee on Judicial Administration for our D.C. courts, which includes our D.C. Superior Court, which is our trial court, and that is where our landlord-tenant court efforts are focused. The National Center for State Courts, along with our D.C. courts and Wells Fargo, are so excited to bring you all here today to talk about this exciting eviction diversion initiative that we are so proud to be a part of. I had the privilege and honor of serving on the National Steering Committee for the Eviction Diversion Initiative, and I'm so excited that our DC courts were the recipient of a generous grant that we applied for and were deemed to be eligible for based on our ongoing efforts to try to be innovative and respectful in how we deal with evictions. I'm proud that the 4-year grants that the National Center for State Court has announced is just the beginning of or continuation of the hard work that our local courts have been doing. I wanted to share a little bit about this exciting initiative, but before I do, I want to take a moment to recognize some of our wonderful partners and guests who are here with us today. And you'll have to forgive me, please, if I miss anyone. I wanted to start by recognizing our Congresswoman Eleanor HolmesNorton, who is always a partner and supporter of the work of our DC courts. Thank you, Congresswoman Norton, for being here. I want to recognize my partner in leading the DC courts, Chief Judge Anita Josie Herring of the D.C. Superior Court. And I'm so excited to recognize the dynamic Mary McQueen, the president of the National Center, president and executive director of the National Center for State Courts. Mary, I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind just waving your hand or standing there. Because it's the visionary leadership of the National Center for State Courts that brought this National Eviction Diversion Initiative together. And I'd like to welcome and proudly announce our partners, Wells Fargo, who are represented here by a number of people, but I'm going to recognize Bill Daly, if you would just please stand, from Wells Fargo. And there are a number of other partners from Wells Fargo who are here as well. If you all could stand so that we can recognize you as well, please. This is historic and exciting, and you'll hear more from Wells Fargo about their vision and their generosity in creating these grants for jurisdictions all around the country. And DC is just one of the recipients of this generous grant. And one of the reasons I like to think that the District of Columbia was selected is because we already have solid partnerships with our stakeholders in the judiciary, in the executive branch, in the legislative branch, but most importantly, in the community. Our tenant advocates, some of whom are here today, and our many other stakeholders in access to justice and who are concerned about housing security. I'd like to welcome the Honorable Kimberly Bacon, who sits on the bench in Lawrence Township in Marion County, Indianapolis, who will be with us on our panel a little later this morning. Nikki Del Cassell, who is a tenant organizer right here in the District of Columbia. Our court's senior managers and leadership, without who our courtrooms and the work that we do could not happen. Dr. Cheryl Bailey, our executive officer, Mr. Herb Roussan, our Deputy Executive Officer, and the judicial leadership team, Ms. Sabrina Dempson, the clerk of our DC Superior Court, Mr. Julio Castillo, who's the clerk of our Court of Appeals, and our judicial leadership team in the civil division of our Superior Court, Judge Anthony Epstein and Judge Todd Edelman, who are here, and Ms. Lynn McGee, who is the director of the civil division. Along with Ms. Caprice Chambers, Ms. Lachey White, Mr. Charleston Carter, our strategic management division at the courts, is Lisa Vanderveer or anyone from our strategic management, they help us write these grants to show what we are already doing so that we can leverage our team with the new resources that are much needed. There's absolutely no underestimating the importance of a home in the lives of a family and a person. When people are secure in their homes, they're able to focus on their other important needs. And when that home is in jeopardy through eviction, foreclosure, everything spirals out of control. And then we see those same families and people come into our court through other doors: domestic violence, child support, child abuse and neglect, mental health. So if we can keep families in their homes and work out ways to help landlords receive the rent that they need to keep those homes safe, it's a win-win for the families who are tenants, for the property owners who are landlords, but most of all for our community. And that's what this Eviction Diversion Initiative is all about. We all work hard, we all care about these issues. That's why we're here. But sometimes it takes vision and innovation to shake things up so that we reach beyond our comfort zones and work more closely with our partners and other stakeholders. So it's for those reasons that I am so excited to have you all here, to see you and to be seen in person, as many of you have already said. We're in for a treat today. At this time, I'd like to welcome to the podium Ms. Mary McQueen, the Executive Director and President of the National Center for State Courts. Thank you.
I have to take a moment to say I'm glad to be back home. Some of you may not remember, but my early career started here in the DC courts. Carl Moultrie was the presiding judge of the trial courts. Ted Newman was the presiding judge of the Court of Appeals. So all roads to successful court administration come through the DC courts. So, Chief, it's very good to be here. The other personal, fact that I would share with you is I think just from the brief introduction, and we'll hear from the Chief later, you can see what an incredible leader she is. And the national recognition of that is that she's been elected as the Vice President of the Conference of Chief Justices and will assume that position after next year. So congratulations, Chief. Looking forward to your leadership. Congresswoman HolmesNorton, so glad to have you here and have that support that is so essential to the DC court. So thank you, and I'm honored that you were able to join us today. I think all of us, after the last 2 years, need to find that hope, that pathway forward. Cheryl Wright from Wells Fargo and I were just speaking briefly about we had evictions before the pandemic. And we were concerned about the economic and housing crisis that was created by the pandemic, in addition to the healthcare crisis. And so today we're here to make a historic announcement about a new partnership that will have a positive impact on our courts and our communities and help us address the housing and eviction crisis. The National Center for State Courts was at the forefront of working with state courts, including the District of Columbia and the territories, before the pandemic. And I would have to say that 96% of all litigation in this country happens in those courts with leaders like Chief Judge Blackburn Rigsby. And we all know that the pandemic resulted in severe economic stress for many families, for tenants, property owners, and landlords alike. But when the pandemic hit, the Conference of Chief Justices and the National Center for State Courts very quickly pivoted to address those problems, including ways that we could assist state courts and, more importantly, the people they serve. And so some of our very best creative thinkers took the lead to help courts adapt their eviction practices and programs to meet those evolving crises from the pandemic. And I'd like to recognize them today. Danielle Hirsch and Samira Nazim are here. Thank you, Danielle, for your leadership. And thank to Zach Zarno, too, who couldn't be with us. So we call the Eviction Diversion Initiative EDI. And as evidenced by today's event, those efforts have received not only national attention and support, but support from every level of government, from legal aid foundations and programs, and from philanthropic organizations. But successful eviction programs provide landlords and tenants with the time, the information, and the resources necessary to resolve housing problems without the prolonged adversarial litigation process. We hope to be the triage to help identify those issues before they become legal problems. They can help tenants stay housed, they can help landlords stay whole, and they can stabilize communities and local housing markets. EDI benefits more than just the parties to the case. And now, thanks to the generous support of Wells Fargo Foundation, the National Center can expand those eviction diversion efforts with additional resources. We can stress test new models, explore new ways to help courts meet those needs, and fairly, under the law, provide positive outcomes with sustainable communities. These benefits will be felt right here in the District of Columbia, along with courts in Alaska, Indiana, Kansas, Michigan, Nevada, New York, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. In total, 13 local courts across the country will receive grant funding through the Eviction Diversion Initiative, followed by another 10 in the next year. As participants in the EDI, these jurisdictions are committed to supporting sustainable, community-driven strategies to resolve the legal problems related to housing. Stronger communities, improved court processes, and better connections to local services are just a few of the ways that those programs will work to build stronger communities and fewer evictions. The National Center for State Courts will serve as a resource to these participating courts, offering evidence-based practices, technical assistance, and support for their work. These courts will serve as the national models to truly transform housing court landscape across the country. We're grateful for the opportunity to work with these courts and are excited to see how eviction aversion and court reform can truly change the way courts do business. It's about the people, about fair and transparent justice. It's about what we can do as a community to meet this crisis. Now it's my pleasure to turn the podium over to Bill Daly, the Vice Chairman of Public Affairs at Wells Fargo. Bill.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you to the Center for the leadership which you are showing, not only on the Eviction Diversion Initiative, but so many other initiatives. Judge Blackburn-Rigsby and Judge Herring, we appreciate the leadership which you are showing today, the entire District of Columbia court team for putting this together and to be leaders. We at Wells Fargo are extremely proud. Eileen Fitzgerald, who runs our housing philanthropy and is quite a leader in the housing space, has been adamantly advocating for this relationship with the center, and we appreciate that. Congresswoman, nice seeing you again, and thank you for your leadership on so many issues for our nation. We are all here today because we see an opportunity to do better for millions of families that rely on a fair, equitable resolution to evictions, and because ultimately we all want people to stay housed. When it comes to avoiding evictions, the barriers people have to navigate are complex, they're systemic, and they disproportionately impact communities of color. According to the Aspen Institute, the studies from cities throughout the country have shown that people of color, particularly Black and Latino people, constitute approximately 80% of people facing evictions today. Add this fact to the challenge of wage loss and health issues due to the pandemic of the last 2.5 years, and it only compounds this enormous problem. And when children are involved in a household, it takes a whole, housing security takes a whole different need. With eviction moratoriums ending, now is the time to act, and with a cross-sector effort, as the judge mentioned earlier, I believe we can change eviction trends in this country. That's why I'm excited to announce a $10 million grant from the Wells Fargo Foundation to the National Center on State Courts in support of the Eviction Diversion Initiative. This grant will go towards jurisdictions, as Mary mentioned, across the United States over the next 4 years to help advance solutions at the local level. We had a conversation earlier, the judge and I, and others, about the difficulty, as the Congresswoman knows better than anyone, to get real progress done at the national level over the last number of years. But at the local level, you can begin to solve problems, and that's what we at Wells Fargo are extremely looking forward to with this grant at the local level for the court systems to take the lead on the diversion initiative. With grants, while grants will be provided, as mentioned, to court systems throughout the country, we're extremely proud that the first round of funding this year will include more than $600,000 to Washington, D.C. That will support and expand the kind of change that we've already seen in D.C., where the D.C. courts set up remote hubs so people could participate virtually in court proceedings. These hubs create accessibility, so that litigants are not at a disadvantage if they don't have technology at home or they have difficulty with the transportation systems to get to the court. This approach helps more tenants have a voice in the process and therefore lead to more meaningful diversion actions. This $10 million grant today builds on the Wells Fargo Foundation's ongoing efforts and focus on housing stability, including efforts to keep 300,000 people housed during the pandemic, and work with 27 non-for-profits across the country that provide free or low-cost legal assistance for renters, particularly vulnerable people disproportionately affected by COVID-19. I want to close by acknowledging the many efforts to address housing affordability by so many of you in this room, the court systems, the Biden-Harris administration, the Mayor Bowser, and those advocating for tenants. These efforts, combined with financial institutions like ours, opening up more avenues to capital and credit, and the eviction diversion funding today can create real change at the local level. So I thank you all for what you are doing, and now is my great honor to introduce Congresswoman Eleanor HolmesNorton in her 15th term as Congresswoman representing the district. She is a leader on so many issues, civil rights, human rights, and she has been a voice for civil rights in this country for all the years in Congress. And she is also the voice for this eviction diversion initiative. So, Congresswoman, please.
Thank you very much. This is a historic day for our court and for the District of Columbia itself. So I am very pleased to celebrate the National Center for State Courts $10 million grant from Wells Fargo for our National Eviction Diversion Initiative. I'm glad that the D.C. Superior Court Eviction Diversion Program has been so superior, so outstanding, that it is one of the first, maybe the very first, to benefit from this new program. The processes of eviction across the country are fundamentally flawed. A process that is supposed to be the landlord's last resort has become their first step in reclaiming unpaid rent from struggling tenants. In 2018, of the 30,000 evictions filed with the Superior Court of the District of Columbia, at least 50% were for less than $1,000 in rent owed, and only 5.5% resulted in a formal eviction. Nationally, of the average 3.6 million cases filed annually, only 42% have judgments filed. The low eviction filing fee in DC encourages landlords to file for evictions as the first response when small amounts of rents are owed, imposing unnecessary costs on tenants and on the court. Eviction diversion programs provide procedural alternatives for landlords and tenants to reach mutually acceptable solutions. The programs provide rental assistance, legal representation, mediation, and other services to help parties better understand and navigate the legal process and to reach amicable solutions. The National Center for State Courts Eviction Diversion Initiative provides a valuable resource to state courts developing and restructuring their eviction diversion programs. Providing program structures, technical support, and assistance will help the courts serve those in their jurisdictions. This grant will give the DC Superior Court the opportunity to expand its partnerships and programs for eviction diversion, including its court navigation program. Court navigators assist individuals in assessing the court process and enable them to advocate for themselves when unrepresented by counsel. It will also expand their partnerships with local legal services organizations that provide services to landlords and tenants. Mediation, rental assistance, and access to legal service providers have proven to reduce litigation and result in solutions for both parties. Eviction diversion is not only a tool to combat poverty, but also to advance racial justice. Nationally, evictions are disproportionately filed against Black tenants and female tenants who are Black or Hispanic. African Americans are twice as likely to have an eviction filed against them than whites. Eviction diversion programs provide early intervention and guidance in the legal process for both tenants and housing providers, keeping more tenants in their homes. Eviction diversion programs can also incorporate language access support, providing translation services to non-English speakers, and the DC Superior Court utilizes satellite offices around the district so parties are not required to travel all the way to the courthouse for proceedings. The DC Superior Court satellite offices allow participants to attend hearings and meetings virtually, providing them with more flexibility and the opportunity to take less time away from work or home. This private public partnership between the National Center for State Courts and Wells Fargo can be an example of how the private housing finance industry and public legal programs can coordinate for the public good, benefiting tenants and housing providers. This grant program can improve eviction court processes and increase early intervention to address housing instability, keeping tenants in their homes and reducing the burden on the courts alike. I appreciate your having me today to celebrate this new and extraordinary partnership and grant program for eviction and diversion programs. I look forward to seeing the impact this grant will make in our community. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Mike Binger. I'm the Executive Vice President at the National Center for State Courts. And if I could invite our panelists to come forward for our conversation on eviction diversion. It's my pleasure to introduce the three panelists for this morning's discussion. Chief Judge, Anita Josie Herring, I'm sure needs no introduction to many of you. She's the Chief Judge of the Superior Courts of the District of Columbia. She was appointed to the bench in 1997. She has served on all of the dockets of the Superior Court, and her list of accomplishments are many. The one that struck me the most was her dedication to the district's families, particularly families who are in distress and families who are in need. Judge Kimberly Bacon from the Lawrence Township Small Claims Court in Indiana, Marion County, Indiana. She also serves as a pro tem on the Marion County Courts in Indiana and maintains an active law practice. She is a guardian ad litem for Kids Voice, and she is the architect of the eviction diversion program that will be funded by the Wells Fargo Foundation through the National Center for State Courts. Finally, Nikki Del Casale is an advocate in the District of Columbia for people who are at risk of losing their homes or losing their apartments. She conducts grassroots outreach to tenants who are at risk. She coordinates services, and she makes sure that partnerships between rental assistance, legal aid, and other programs are made available. So if you could join me in welcoming our three panelists. At the heart of the Eviction Diversion Initiative is the notion of partnership. We learned during the pandemic that courts could not do it alone, that it took a community, and it took partnerships within the community to address the eviction crisis that we were all facing. In light of that, it is important to maintain these partnerships. So Chief Judge Josie Herring, can you speak to the efforts of the DC Eviction Working Group and its role in identifying opportunities to improve, reform, and transform the housing court?
Well, I can tell you that the judges in the civil division who really lead out on a lot of the landlord and tenant issues in the Superior Court have been working very hard as members of that working group, along with other stakeholders, as you indicated, public and private stakeholders, to reform our landlord and tenant system. They've been very innovative, and I think we will pick up a lot of the advances that we learned as a result of the pandemic. But in addition to that, I think this broad partnership, which is in a real sense collaboration at its best, which is something the court is very accustomed to collaborating with stakeholders, presents a new opportunity to keep the unhoused in their homes and to reduce really the need to have a significant number of cases filed in our system that really can be addressed short of trial and a judgment.
Thank you. Judge Bacon, you are now spearheading a new diversion program in your court in Indiana. Can you speak to the initiative and the role and importance of outside partners in making that program successful?
Absolutely. One of the things that we found as the moratorium was being lifted and the rental assistance program monies were made available was the fact that much of the policy did not appear to be working very well with the courts. So we created collaborations with our local partners and began to take a look at wraparound services that were needed for those that were in need as a result of the eviction being filed. So we were able to pull in many community partners, such as rental assistance programs that we had on site, so that if people had questions or if their applications were denied or failed, they were able to get on-site assistance to get that application back on track. We were also able to bring in, of course, legal services in order to be able to allow them an opportunity to determine what their real issues were and have that conversation. We were able to recognize that some people were without resources to wash their clothes, opening up an opportunity with a local program that allowed people to go get their clothes washed or have an opportunity to wash their clothes and then also get a meal that they may not have had, because a lot of people were just shut down as a result of the pandemic.
Thank you, Judge. Nikki, we've seen in many places how impactful it can be when courts and communities work together. Can you tell us about your work on behalf of tenants in the district, how you've been able to help bridge the differences and the distance between the courts and community members who are at risk of eviction?
Yeah, so I started last year as the campaign coordinator for the Cancel Rent Coalition in DC. That job has since ended, but I'm still doing a lot of volunteer work in organizing and tenant advocacy. So what we started trying to do was a woman who works as an attorney for Bread for the City convened a working group of lawyers across the district, and we met several times a month. We actually have a meeting tomorrow for eviction prevention. And so we were working really hard to come up with a system when the COVID protections ended to be able to help people not get evicted. So we came up with a system where all the organizations came together, they created a flyer, and then we kind of, with the tenant organizers who had time to dedicate to this in addition to all their other duties that are paid, we created a way to canvass. So we have a system where we send out canvassers, we train them in both how to canvass, how to have these conversations, because it's not just, hey, you might be getting evicted. This might be the first time that they learn about it. If they weren't served properly, there may be other compounding factors. So it's also, kind of like a micro counseling. So you have to be prepared to have, there could be somebody who's very upset, there could be children at home, et cetera. So we created a system to train them to do that, and then go out and knock doors and connect people to the Landlord Tenant Legal Assistance Network, which is set up by the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. And so people can call that Monday through Friday and get in touch with a lawyer and get assessed to see if they qualify for pro bono services. In addition, some canvassers of their own volition have given out their own personal numbers so that if for some reason the hotline's not being answered, or if it's a holiday weekend, they can get in contact with one of us and we can, phone a personal lawyer and be like, hey, can you help them out? But basically, it's been a lot of groups coming together to do this, and it's been an immense effort to get it started.
Thank you. Part of the effort at Eviction Diversion, of course, is improving the court and the court processes. One of the pieces of this grant program is to think creatively about how evictions can be handled differently, and also creatively about what the court experience is for both landlords and for tenants. These court reforms are particularly important because of the impact of evictions on communities of color, and the need to engage with those communities so that courts are not seen simply as barriers to justice, but as facilitators of justice. Chief Justice Josie Herring, DC is at the forefront of rethinking housing cases, how they're triaged, how they're managed, and in making the court more accessible. Can you speak a bit about some of the changes that have taken place or are under consideration and how you think they will ultimately improve the experience for people who are coming to eviction court.
Well, I think some of the earlier speakers referenced the fact that we permit people to participate or provide opportunities for people to participate in proceedings involving landlord and tenant matters, but other matters as well, because we're a general jurisdiction court virtually. I think this is very helpful to people who have very little money, very little time, and often competing obligations, childcare, work commitment, and so on. So I think we were sort of called into action to be creative due to the pandemic. So that's part of the silver lining, believe it or not, of the pandemic. But in addition to that, we have hired or will have on board two facilitators and two navigators to work with tenants so that they don't get mired down in the system, and will reach out to tenants at the front end of the process once a case is initiated to direct them to resources and organizations that provide resources for assistance with arrears or debt due to not having, sort of opportunities to work in the same way that they had prior to the pandemic. In addition, social services will be provided, and that's part of the role of the navigators to connect the tenant with organizations that provide social services. I think someone mentioned, a family or some families were not able to wash their clothes. I think as you start looking into the cases, you find out more about the personal circumstances of each family you're dealing with. And so it's a great thing that we're going to have staff on board to sort of walk tenants through that process, but also link them with attorneys or organizations that provide attorneys, because we can't directly provide the attorneys, unfortunately, through our court and our funding, but to link them with legal service providers and pro bono attorneys who will tell them what their rights are and who will walk with them through the process of securing the help they need to have a successful result and keep a roof over their heads and the heads of their children and others.
Thank you, Judge. Judge Bacon, what type of changes have you made and are you making to eviction practices at your court, and what prompted those changes?
So for our court, evictions have always been a problem in Marion County, which is Indianapolis, for those of you who don't know where Marion County is. And so one of the things that we have worked at and struggled with in the past was the short amount of time it took to go through our process, anywhere from 10 days to maybe 14 tops, but you were facing eviction in a very short period of time with an inability to recover from that non-payment issue. So one of the things that, again, a silver lining with COVID, was that with the rental assistance programs that came out, were also some monies to give us an opportunity to pilot some of the things that our court wanted to do to expand the eviction process and allow more time for resources to get to the tenants. And so with that, we have implemented a navigator position along with a facilitator position, which is a mediator of sorts, because oftentimes the landlord-tenant matter can be resolved just with a conversation. But once you get to court, it becomes much more acrimonious. And so with having that on-site facilitator, which is one of the things that the EDI grant provides to us, this allows for negotiations to occur, repayment plans, even negotiated move-outs, because the eviction filing, of course, is what impacts that individual, that tenant the most, because then it makes it more difficult for them to move. We also provided the navigator position, which allows for the tenant to have a person to make contact with after they leave court. Oftentimes, because it is a traumatic incident for them, they are oftentimes trying to figure out, well, how can I get this rent paid? So they may not recognize all the resources that are available to them, but they also don't know how to come back to court to say, where do I get this help? Now that I've heard the date that I have to move out, where do I go get this help? That navigator position allows for them to have another person to come back to court to contact, and allows them to say, this is where you might want to go for this resource, or let's work on that rental assistance application, or let me see if I can get the rental assistance in now that we know the date that you have to get the delinquency paid by. That's the benefit of having the resources that you all are providing so that we can create those positions and allow those navigators and facilitators to do the work so that we can have a case dismissed or have that eviction completely, the filing even completely avoided.
Thank you, Judge. Nikki, you're in the grassroots, working out in the community, and you hear directly from people who are at risk of being evicted. What are some of the common reasons that you hear for why people either don't answer or that they work to actually avoid going to court to deal with these eviction issues?
So in preparation for this, I just have kind of tried to anonymize any type of person that I would be talking about. So there's been a couple of instances, both personally for me talking to people, and then also canvassers who come back and say, hey, like this very unique specific thing happened, what do I do? So there's been quite a few people who don't have access to phones or electronics or the internet. So they come in and it's like it's somebody who may be elderly or somebody who might be differently abled and say like, I don't have a phone, but my neighbor does. Can my neighbor call the hotline for me? So some volunteers will call, the canvassers will call with their own phone and stay for a couple hours, depending on how long the intake takes, in order to get them connected. There are also really good programs available through the court, but also through some legal services where they can, somebody from the organization might come to your home and bring, a laptop or a hotspot or something, or you can go to a public location where there is that technology available to access as well. A couple of other things that have happened, and they vary, but they're all pretty sad and pull at your heartstrings, is that there's been a couple people I've talked to, it's like I've been in the hospital for most of COVID with other issues, and I have, a fridge full of cancer medication. If I'm evicted, I can't move, I can't have my meds, I am basically going to die if I get evicted. And then there's been a lot of people who have parents, they have parents, but they have children who, we had one a few weeks ago where we were able to at least stop the eviction for a couple days so we could get that family somewhere safe. But a lot of times people don't have options or they don't know what their options are. So it's like, well, we're just gonna stand in line at the shelter until hopefully we get in. So there's a lot of different reasons. A lot of it is non-payment of rent, especially during the pandemic, and I know that a couple people mentioned what the average money was, but I go through all the court cases for each one and read through all the dockets, and there are quite a few where it's like, you owe $20,000, $40,000, $80,000 in rent because you just haven't worked, or you had COVID for like months and you were in the hospital. So there's a lot of different factors that happen, but it definitely is disproportionately affecting our Black and brown tenants in DC and all of the organizations that I'm involved with, and whether they're grassroots or they're nonprofits, are always trying to prioritize those tenants first, because that's who it impacts the most.
Great, thank you. We have a phrase at the National Center for State Courts that Mary McQueen is fond of reminding us: evidence-based practices. In other words, what is the impact and how do we prove that it is having that impact? This last question is for all three of you. What impact have you seen thus far in your efforts at eviction diversion? What are some of the success stories? And also, what are some of the continuing challenges?
Well, I just want to acknowledge Judge Edelman, who's the deputy presiding judge of the civil division. He actually is leading out on this effort for us at the Superior Court. And I've had many talks with him, certainly recently, about what progress they're making. And I think the good news is that in the District of Columbia, the community generally has been supportive of working to provide options for tenants so that they don't get evicted. Those efforts had not, over all of these years prior to all the things that happened during the pandemic, quite sort of hit the target of where we need to be in light of the problem. And as you indicated, it disproportionately affects the problem, people of color. And so, so far, the partnership with all of the stakeholders is bringing to bear, I think in a more focused way, the lawyers and those who will help by doing pro bono practice in these cases with people from the social work field. That's a new sort of thing for us here in the District of Columbia, because I think when you pull together all of those resources as well as educate the public, which we are continually doing, by going out into the community, really to speak about the programming that either the court offers or that our stakeholders who work with the court offers, I think the community gets more information about options that they have. We've also been super fortunate to have our local city council pass a lot of legislation really to impose moratoriums on evictions during the most critical time right now, but obviously for the last 2.5 years as we have really contended with the pandemic. That was really critical. At the same time, quite frankly, we've tried to be sensitive to the interest of landlords, but obviously we want to make sure that the unhoused or people who are on the brink of becoming unhoused have all of the legal support and resources they need to stave that off, because when individuals become unhoused, they end up in all of our other systems, as was indicated. And so I am proud to say that just getting the information out so far and working with the Office of Tenants Advocate, the Landlord and Tenants Network, the legal services community, and other providers, we are getting the message out. And we are really changing our calendars in terms of how cases are called to be more accommodating to members of the public who find themselves in our system. And we're really being a lot more sensitive to really the plight of all involved in the cases, with an eye towards helping them to get to a resolution by having proper folks to talk to in terms of all their legal options. So we really appreciate the efforts that the court is engaging in, and we can't thank you enough. That is the National Center, of course, Wells Fargo, as well for its grant to the National Center. But we also, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals, who sits on various committees with the National Center, but we all at bottom are pushing hard and pushing forward to be as inventive and creative as we can. And I want to give a shout out to our magistrate judges, because they spend a great deal of time handling landlord and tenant matters. And as a judge, I've handled many landlord and tenant matters in the past. And so while I'm obviously, I still have court cases as the chief judge, but management has sort of taken over. And so I'm not in L&T or landlord and tenant court at this time. I also want to thank Lynn McGee, who's the director of our civil division, because we've worked hard to look at our rules, our practices, our court processes, and all of that is happening because not just because of this effort, but we have really committed 1,000-fold to being innovative here in the district. And again, we thank you for your assistance.
Judge Bacon, impact?
So even prior to the pandemic, we were working in Indiana on access to justice. And that was one of the things that our Chief Justice, Loretta Rush, was very, she advocated for that with our courts. And so what we have seen with the eviction diversion initiatives and the other initiatives that we've had going on is that we have become more collaborative with all branches of government, including weekly meetings in order to take a look at the rental assistance programs, to make sure that the rental assistance programs are getting monies out effectively in a timely manner to prevent those evictions. We are also looking at other collaborations with the Bar Foundation that are putting kiosks throughout the state so that forms are available so that a tenant that's self-represented, of course, can get those forms with easy access. As I said before, we have we have what we call TAP attorneys, which are tenant advocate attorneys that are in our courts that allow for the tenants to have a conversation to organize their issues, but also they also come in and do representation many times for those tenants. But what we have seen with the implementation of the positions that we've had is that we're looking at dismissals coming in. Rental assistance is getting out to people. And then when we build in more time and give them more information, tenants more information, it is allowing for those dismissals to occur, for the delinquency and rent to be satisfied because the rental assistance is getting to them. And so by taking what used to be a 7-day move out and moving it out to 3 weeks to allow those processes to work and allow a tenant to have access to programs and justice, we see those dismissals coming in far more often. We've also seen a reduction in the number of filings because while a tenant may make it through 1 month and get a case dismissed, oftentimes they were getting refiled on maybe a month or two later, or if they had another hiccup with their employment. Now with the rental assistance and these programs for people to, that they've been informed about, they know where to start and what to do in order to prevent that eviction from happening again. So you see that you don't have the repeat filers. And so we are actually seeing a reduction in our filings as well. So it's good stuff so far.
Nikki, impact?
So a couple of things. I'll start with like negative and then end on positive. So as this, this panel is happening, there is an eviction going on at Union Station right now, as well as at 12th Street and New York Avenue for the two largest remaining unhoused encampments in DC. And originally how I got involved in all of this stuff was several years ago, and I still am a team leader with a nonprofit, volunteer-based, is where I do a lot of work with unhoused encampments, a lot of nonprofits, and also like grassroots organizations. And so I wasn't able to go to this one because I came to this event, but some of my friends are down there right now just texting me. It's still happening right before I came up here. And there is still a lot of work to be done on that end of it. And I just want to say that a lot of what you're doing as a canvasser and what you're doing as organizing is connecting on a human and personal level with people and understanding where they're coming from. And so just how you said, like, you don't know what the options are and like also getting it all dismissed. You just want to make sure that you're, like if you see someone struggling and you have the ability to just listen, it might be something simple like, oh, you can just do this thing, or hey, let's get you a mediator. You can have the conversation remedied, and then there isn't a case anymore, and that takes a lot of the stress off. But on the success side, there's been a lot of people that we've talked to who have since gotten their jobs back, have been able to repay and start going. They're like, I want to canvas now. I want to go to other people and help them. We have certain people who have gotten jobs being tenant advocates now because they got activated by being at risk of eviction. They overcame it or are still struggling with it. And so again, just the human nature of all these we have a lot of different resources, and when we come together to address all of the needs and not just like one micro need, it's a lot easier. And so I just thank everybody who's willing to be here and to listen to this. And hopefully that this program will continue, this initiative will be able to help divert a lot more evictions.
Great. Thank you very much. Would you join me in thanking our panelists? I would also like to thank our other speakers, Bill Daly, Chief Judge Blackburn-Rigsby, Mary McQueen, Congresswoman HolmesNorton, particularly to you, Chief Judge, for hosting this event this morning. Much thanks to the DC courts and also to the Wells Fargo Foundation, for which this would not be possible. There is a reception, but Chief Judge, I would like to offer you the opportunity for closing remarks if you'd like.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out, and that was a very informative panel. You hear the perspectives of dealing with evictions with creative and innovative solutions, both here in the District of Columbia from our dynamic team, in Marion County and Indianapolis, Indiana. Thank you, Judge. And from the perspective of a tenant advocate, to hear your perspective touching the lives of people in such a personal way is very moving. But this is an issue that impacts all of us. When people are housed safely and families can stay together and property owners can recoup the value for their property, it builds stronger communities. And that's why we're here. We can't do it alone, any of us, even though we each have a vitally important role in this. And when the issues land in our courtrooms, we don't want that to be the end of the road anymore. And I think this initiative, this Eviction Diversion initiative, helps us put things in place sooner so that this is not the end of the road when they reach the court. And as a court, we can leverage our resources working together with our community partners, Wells Fargo, and with the National Center for State Courts, and most importantly, our local community advocates and groups who work on this issue every day. So thank you for coming to the DC courts today. Have some light refreshments and enjoy. And just go back, I hope, recommitted to this important work. Thank you.